Motivational Mondays is the perfect way to set the tone for your week. Everyone can use motivation. Mondays are amazing, rich with opportunities, full of potential, and now motivational. Your week begins here. Good Monday morning. My name is Genevieve Jones-Wright, here with you this Motivational Monday. And as promised last week, we are going to continue the conversation about the civil rights movement with the legendary Charles Bonner. So I am so very happy that you're here this morning to inspire us with your story. And you truly have a wonderful story that just continues to inspire and make impact on the world. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Genevieve. I'm absolutely grateful that you invited me to be on your show.
I want to jump right in to your story. If you wouldn't mind, can you just tell us a little bit about your background growing up in Alabama?
Sure. My story growing up in Alabama, 20 miles west of Selma. And it was there probably around 7 years old that it dawned on me that contrary to the popular opinion that Abraham Lincoln had freed the slaves, what I saw around me in the cotton fields were old people with their furrowed brows and their bleeding fingers and these long cotton sacks dragging behind them. It looked like slavery to me. And it became very clear to me that we were an oppressed people. We were not out of slavery, and that whatever the view was that Abraham Lincoln had freed the slave, he had missed us because we were still in slavery. And I vowed right there that I was not going to live in that condition, and that I was going to leave Selma. And I just envisioned and imagined a different world, a different life, particularly a world where I could change those conditions. And that's what led me ultimately to get involved in the civil rights movement when I was 16 years old in 1963. That was the time when the Reverend Bernard Lafayette and his then wife, Collier Lafayette, came to Selma as student nonviolent SNCC workers, we call them. He told us that he and his fellow class members in Tennessee had engaged in this direct action. They had gone into segregated lunch counters and they had demanded to be served, and they were beaten. The white folks poured hot coffee on them. They burned cigarettes on their hands. And some of the people were severely beaten and even killed. And he told us that we would engage in this same kind of nonviolence in order to bring about changes in Selma, Alabama. My buddy and I, we looked at each other and said, this man must be crazy. And sensing that we were not buying into the concept of nonviolence, he posed kind of a question, rhetorical question to us. He said, well, let me ask you this. I see that you all have been to Sunday school. Well, by the way, do you know the name of a man who killed Mahatma Gandhi? And we said, no, we know Gandhi. He said, well, at Sunday school, I'm sure they taught you about Jesus Christ, but did they tell you the name of the man or men who killed Jesus? We said, no, some Romans, but we don't know the man. And he said, well, the reason why you don't know the names of the men, of the man that killed Gandhi, of the people, the men that killed Jesus, is because those men were men of violence, and they were men of evil, and they were men on the other side of the Spirit of God. And the reason you know God, and the reason why you know Jesus Christ, is because they were men of love, and they were men who were understood they were a part of the Spirit of God. And that's why their lives, their names will live forever. That was a game changer. We then wanted to know, well, what do we need to do? How do we go about engaging in this direct action? And he invited us to his home to meet his wife, Collier. And there they laid out a plan, which was for us to organize all of our students at the R.B. Hudson High School and have them come down to one of the big churches. We met in the basement of that church for 6 months, learning freedom songs, learning nonviolent techniques, learning what to do if we were beaten. how we would go limp, how we would not strike back. We would organize teams and go into kind of mock demonstrations to make sure that we understood the principles of nonviolence. And we did that from March of 1963 until September 16th of 1963.
I knew that you all trained, but I've never heard the story about you buying into nonviolence because of the lessons of Mahatma Gandhi and Jesus himself. And that is very powerful.
We completely practiced nonviolence. We canvassed the neighborhoods. We attempted to register people to vote, and that we would leave school and go back to the church and practice nonviolence. We learned freedom songs. We wrote freedom songs. But then this monumental event happened on September 15th, 1963. As you may remember, that was the killing, the bombing of the 4 girls in the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. And we heard this news. So we immediately went to the Freedom House, which is where Bernard and Collier lived. We called their house the Freedom House. And we knocked on the door, and neither Bernard nor Collier were home. We called the SNCC office and said, we would like someone to come from Atlanta, from the SNCC headquarters, and help us organize a demonstration to protest. We got no answer. So we decided, well, we have to do this ourselves. We've been training for 6 months. We know what to do. So we immediately began to call all of our R.B. Hudson High students to not go to the school, but rather to go to the church. And we staged our first demonstration, which was at a Carter's drugstore. We went in and conducted a sit-in. 4 kids were arrested. The rest of us went back to the church, announced what had happened. 4 of us were in jail. We had advised the students. And then we put the question to the kids. What do we do? Will you see us go into the hospital, the other kids in jail? Do we go back into the street, demonstrate again, or do we go back to the school? Unanimously, by consensus, everyone said we go into the streets. And so we went back into the streets. 77 of us all were arrested, stayed in jail for probably about, I don't know, somewhere around a week or so. And that was the beginning of the Selma movement. What's unique about that is that that was before all of the icons of the civil rights movement. That was before Dr. King. That was before Jesse Jackson. That was before John Lewis. That was just us students after having been trained by Reverend Bernard Lafayette and his wife, Collier Lafayette.
So what I love is that you were there and you were part of it. And so you're able to give us insight into things that we didn't know. You say in the prologue that you all had no training on nonviolence before you started to engage in this. And you really didn't have an understanding that there was a way to really do this undertaking. But what you did know was about your lives. And you understood the lives that you all had to live. And you understood the fear in your parents' eyes when they talked about the KKK. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you became, as you say, the tip of the arrow, the vanguard? What pushed you into that at such a young age? And how old were you, Mr. Bonner?
I was 16, and all of my classmates were 16 and younger. There was no option. There was no alternative. It was either we live in this subservient life or we took a path of trying to change it. Once Bernard and Collier instilled in us that nonviolence was powerful, that it was really consistent with the Spirit of God, and that no matter what they did to us, so long as we engaged in that nonviolence and engaged in our own personal power, that we would be victorious, as they had been in Nashville. And so we bought into the idea that we could bring about these changes. And Bernard and Collier emphasized that it was up to us, that we either change this condition, this segregation condition, or we live the way our parents have been living since slavery, since we were all kidnapped and brought here. And so that was a powerful message. And there was a song we used to sing, and before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. And that was our theme, that the worst thing could happen to us is that they were going to kill us. And so once we understood that was the worst, then, once we understood also that we were protected with the Spirit of God, it was on. And so we were totally committed to bringing about the change, no matter what.
Determined to change it. I know that there are a lot of viewers out there who know that they need change in their life, and maybe they're afraid of something. You talked about the biggest thing that could ever happen to you, the biggest risk was that they would take your life. And even in that moment, you understood that you still had to persevere. What would you give to someone who's watching and listening in today when they're scared of rejection, when they're scared to take that next step, to take their life to another level, to engage in their passion?
Thank you for that question. That's a very important question. Chapter 30 in Tip of the Air talks about scientific spiritualism. And this is something that is not religious. It's not about faith. It's about facts of science, like gravity. I mean, no matter what your belief system is, gravity is a fact. The personal power is a fact. And one can engage in that personal power to accomplish anything one would like to accomplish. We all were born with the spirit of the creating energy of the universe. So once you understand that power, then you have purpose, and you connect that spirit to a purpose. The purpose that God sent us here to do something for others, to be of service to all. And that's the way to make sure that you will never be afraid. You will always have self-esteem. You will always have that personal power. So that it's the personal power is a matter of connecting to the source. So we are that spirit. We have that personal power. So long as we connect that personal power emotionally to the source, we will have our own personal power, and we will accomplish anything we choose to accomplish. And most importantly, those kids' stories in the book, when you read them, you will see they became doctors, they became lawyers, they became teachers, they became ministers. They all had some kind of successful career. Why? Because they had a purpose. They understood they were connected with their personal power. They were connected with the source. And their purpose was to change the apartheid system we were living under. And so we have to let our young people know that's the key to self-esteem. It's the key to understand who we are. We are the creating energy of the universe. Our purpose is to serve each other and serve all.
Absolutely. I feel like you have partnered with me in this endeavor called Motivation.In.Action as another empower mentor, because you have hit on so many of the tenets of what we teach, which is writing your own story. Who better to have the pen to write their own story than the person whose life it is? So
Yes.
many times in life, through societal norms or just our cultures, even laws and rules, policies, we are told what we can and cannot do. And you, of course, experience that firsthand in a very real way during the student nonviolent civil rights movement in Selma. You mentioned that you and your friends, your colleagues, your fellow warriors became lawyers and doctors and other pillars of our society. You yourself say in your book that you were going to go to trade school and you were going to be a barber. Now you are a distinguished and impactful civil rights lawyer. So I do want to talk about that. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do as a civil rights lawyer and a little bit about some of your most impactful or favorite cases?
Thomas Jefferson articulated the civil rights very succinctly in the Declaration of Independence when he wrote, quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, and that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights," which means you can't give them away, you can't sell them. Among them or life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So as a civil rights lawyer, I represent people whose civil rights have been violated. Their right to life, their right to liberty, typically under the First Amendment, where someone's First Amendment rights have been violated. So one of the cases I'm working on right now is called the residents of Hunters Point versus Tetra Tech Inc. and Lennar Corporation and another company called 5 Points LLC. Hunters Point is the Black community here in San Francisco. It's approximately 38 to 40,000 people. And this company, Tetra Tech, was hired by the Navy under a $1 billion contract to remove all the radiation from this Navy shipyard. This is what is called a Superfund site. Congress has deemed this to be the second most dangerous Superfund site. It's about a 500-acre site and is filled with radiation. That's rather than removing the radioactive soil, as they were contracted and obligated to do pursuant to that contract, this Tetra Tech company would take clean soil, give it to the Navy, and told the Navy that it was all clean, leaving the radioactive dirt in the community to poison these predominantly Black folks in that community. And so now these people, various cancers and various illnesses. And I have sued that company for $27 billion, billion with the B. This is an important environmental case because these people are powerless to do anything about it. So that's one case that I'm working on right now that's very important. The second case is called Alonzo Grant versus Syracuse. In that case, that's a police misconduct case. And that's a case I tried back in Syracuse, won a $2.1 million verdict against 2 Syracuse police officers who beat up my 54-year-old African-American client, never had any convictions in his life. He called the police because his daughter who was at the time very pregnant, kind of terminally pregnant, was in an argument with the next door neighbor. The cops came out, went into his house, ordered him out, and then beat him and still stayed brain damage. So we won the case, and just in December here last month, the Second Court of Appeal in New York affirmed unanimously a jury verdict, and now the defendants are trying to seek a further appeal, but we'll win that too. But this other case is a case called the Jamelski victims versus John Jamelski. And that's the case I wrote a book on called The Bracelet, the story to end child sex slavery in the world. That case involved the kidnapping of my then 16-year-old girl. She escaped, and in a very unique, ingenious way. And she brought to light that this multimillionaire white man named John Jamelski had been kidnapping girls for 20 years and keeping them in that dungeon. So once we filed the lawsuit against him, then 4 other girls came forward and say he did the same thing to me. So we took all of his money. He was a multimillionaire owning real estate from New York to LA. And we gave it all to these 5 victims. And that's why I wrote that book, The Bracelet, the story to end child sex slavery in the world.
Well, I can tell you that I'm going to pick that book up as well. And really and truly, I can't fully express with words how grateful I am to have you still on the battlefield and to stand up and assert the rights of your clients. And the impact that you have made on our society really is immeasurable. And so I want to thank you for coming out this morning to help inspire others to live their lives on purpose, to write their own stories, and to just take back their lives and to acknowledge the agency that we have over our lives to change the trajectory of our lives. So thank you so very much, Mr. Bonner.
Well, thank you, and let's definitely get together again. I look forward to it. You all keep up the good work.
Absolutely. Join us next week as we talk with one of my favorite rocket scientists in the world, a young woman by the name of Jasmine Sadler. We're going to talk about her Black History in Motion event that she puts on every single year, and also her award from her alma mater, Point Loma Nazarene University. You don't want to miss it because she is just that inspiring.